So often when we look at investigative journalism, there's that feeling of frustration afterwards that the incredible stories here don't have as much impact as they should. And I was wondering, after this package was published, which was over several months in 2019, what happened? Was there outrage? Can the international community do anything, or are you in more what I sometimes refer to as, the sort of bearing witness kind of investigative journalism, where you're doing careful documentation for sort of future generations? But did anything happen afterwards? I imagine things have gotten worse.
I picked the latter on that one. The government's typical response to a solidly reported investigative story is silence. It is very rare to see an investigative report of any nature by Reuters or anyone else lead to the dismissal of a minister or a change of any major reorganization. I mean, these things happen anyway, but they generally happen for different reasons. The government does like to make a lot of noise about what might be considered sort of more gossipy kind of stuff, the kinds of things that come up on Twitter, or something that is really maybe not very well sourced. Those are the kinds of things they really want to hold up and say, this is outrageous, how could someone say this? When you really do your homework, they usually just don't say anything. And I think, particularly in a society so closely involved in social media, there's become this, people are accustomed to reading tweets, and reading a full investigation to really respond to it doesn't happen that much. I don't know, Angus, if that was, it's been my experience at least. I don't know if, Angus, you thought the government was really responsive to
I think the only proper comment I've ever got from the government was to be called, I think, slanderous and insulting by the information minister, and that's about it. But I think,
which went into the story, if I'm not mistaken.
It did, yeah. But I mean, I think our work has been, it's been referenced by the UN and its reports, and obviously by everybody kind of seeking to highlight the repressive forces which Maduro controls. But yeah, in terms of, I think, actually changing something on the government side, I have read somewhere that the government has started to kind of to at least try to restrain this particular death squad slightly. But I think, but equally, I mean, I think that they've attracted a lot of it. They've attracted a lot of attention from the UN and various NGOs, just because I think they've been kind of the most kind of overtly kind of horrific aspects of the government's kind of repression in recent years.
So it sounds like, from what you're saying, that international pressure doesn't actually do much.
Well, no, I think, well, they seem to be stronger than ever at the moment. So I think
yeah, and you documented really well the ties with Cuba and all the help that they got in building their repressive apparatus as well, and the training, right? That was one of the pieces in the series that we read, was about the Cuban help and support for Venezuela.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that was something that had always been, it was kind of very, it was known in a kind of gossipy manner. And indeed, the government didn't hide the fact that they had, that they had kind of Cuban advisors on the ground. And obviously kind of Chavez and Fidel Castro were very close. But I think, I wanted to find kind of, the documentary proof that actually kind of showed the extent to which the Cubans were involved in teaching this unit called the DIJESIM, which is the kind of the military counterintelligence unit. How the Cubans taught this unit to kind of seek out soldiers who could pose some sort of threat to Maduro's rule.
Bill Holstein's asking if you can tell us, who supported Maduro the most? China, Russia, Cuba, or if we can't quantify it, do you want to talk a little bit about the support that they've given Maduro and why? Oil, I assume.
Brian, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so all of them in different ways. The relationship with China was built, my understanding or my belief was that Chinese planners, economic planners in the early aughts were looking at their economy and saying we have to stitch up a supply of oil. So they developed this kind of convergent political and economic and energy strategy whereby they lent money to the Chavez government and Chavez government played back into oil. And that funneled a lot of money into Venezuela. And it did start to spread as a result of these things. You'd see Chinese products around. There's Chinese cars you'll see on the street and different types of Chinese phones. But basically, once the oil markets collapsed, the Chinese weren't interested anymore. And Venezuelans owe them a bunch of money, but I don't think they particularly care. I think it was a bit like an insurance policy that they needed. The Chinese have basically disappeared. They still have rhetorical and political support. They are not interested in putting money in here. The Russians came in later, and the Russians basically began trading crude. Not obviously, they don't need oil. The Russians have plenty of it, but they are helping in different ways, particularly when the sanctions came in moving crude around. And they are also not interested in actually putting money in on the ground. There's no evidence of that. They also do provide rhetorical support because that sort of renewed Cold War we have. And the Cubans have been very much what's constantly pointed to as the intelligence agencies, which is what Angus's story was about. It's very hard to pin down what the Cubans are. There's so many apocryphal tales, and I would guess a lot of it's true, but it's also difficult to really pin down who has done what. And there is the sense that the Cubans are so good at intelligence that without them, the military would not have the same sort of social control. I think that's entirely plausible. And the Cubans are known for being fantastically good at intelligence. They continue to function sort of in that role. They didn't have quite, at the height of the Cuba-Venezuela relationship, there were doctors here and there were large shipments of oil. That's definitely kind of tamped down a little bit, but that relationship is still there. And the Cubans are sort of these ghosts that float around. There's rumored to be Cuban colonels in this or that spot. And most folks have, a lot of folks in the military have heard stories or have stories about, we heard Cuban accents in these different places. And I think it's quite plausible. But there isn't really, the United States wants to kind of pressure both at the same time. So there's not really much changing there. But as for actual presence, I don't think anyone really wants to be here. It's not working very well.